Oh, hey, why don't you join me? Let's draw and paint together.
Well, here we are again. Time for a new video and for me to share some more of what I know with you. And since it's been a couple of months since we drew a spaceship, why not do that? I've been trying to get better at watercoloring, but I've been trying to get better in a way that's comfortable to me. So I've been drawing and watercoloring in my sketchbook where I don't need to color in a big surface. And I also chose to paint topics that I enjoy quite a bit, very much I would say, namely robots and spaceships. And over the last 2 months or so, I've been doing these sci-fi watercolor explorations, and I thought today might be a good occasion to share one with you. Even though this is not technically a watercolor illustration, it is an ink wash, and it's been a while since I did an ink wash painting, and I've been missing it. If you don't know what an ink wash is, imagine using just your gray markers for coloring or using just one tone of watercolor for coloring. It's sort of the same level, but then instead of a marker or watercolor, you're using the ink. And the wash comes from the water. So in this case, I took a bit of India ink and I diluted it in some water, basically taking just a couple of droplets of ink and some water. And these are really just a couple of droplets because Indian ink is very strong. So I just dipped the tip of my brush into the Indian ink and mixed it up with around a spoonful of water in a separate jar, and this gives me quite a nice gray that I can work with. And if you want, you can also go towards a darker gray by adding a little bit more ink, and you can also make it a lot more brighter by just adding water until you get to the level of gray that you want. Now, I did call this an ink wash, but yeah, I would say it's more of a blocking in than an actual wash. I am drawing in a mixed media sketchbook from C. White of Brighton, and while I really love this sketchbook, precisely because I can use watercolors in it, it cannot take too much water. So I can't really do washes in it, but for the purposes I'm using, it's perfect. Let me actually blend in 1 or 2 examples of what I've been doing with watercolors in this sketchbook, and you'll see what I mean. Returning to the painting process, ink wash is a perfect solution if you want to bring some value into your drawing, even if you are doing industrial design sketching. Of course, you have to pay attention to the fine liners or pens that you are using. They have to be water resistant. Usually I tell you that whatever you're drawing, the cheapest tools are perfectly fine. While in this case, there is an exception for that, because usually the cheapest tools are not watercolor resistant. They were perfectly fine with markers, but if you go over them with water, the ink that they put out tends to run. So what I would say is you would have to go with a bit more expensive ones. Rot rings, microns, staplers, and Copic pens or fine liners are usually a safe option if you know you are going to mix it with water. As you can see, I like to do pre-sketches depending on the line art I'm going for. In this case, I wanted a more illustrative line art where the underlying structure and the construction lines won't show through. And for that, pencil pre-sketch is perfect. For my industrial design stuff, I usually do the pre-sketch with a very light opacity marker. So if you were going with cold grays, then maybe a C2 or C1, something like that. But in this case, a soft pencil, or well, relatively soft, semi-hard HP pencil will do the job just perfectly. But you have to pay attention to the erasing part after you are done going over your lines with the fine liner, if you're going to use watercolor or ink wash, because the paper can be damaged by too strong erasing, and especially mixed media paper, which is only up until one point good for water, that can damage the paper quite quickly, and then the whole watercolor won't work. It will give you a different result than what you would expect from a fresh piece of paper. So be very gentle when erasing the lines, or you can just decide to leave them in. It can be an artistic choice of yours. Another thing worth mentioning here is not to use soft pencils. The softer you go, the less you can do detail work and the easier you can smear the lines you put down, losing the pre-sketch but also dirtying the paper you are working on. I would stay in the range of an HP pencil. You also don't want to go too hard with the pencils because then you will have to press harder, which will be another problem when it comes to the erasing. I mentioned detailing work just now in the sketching phase because in this type of drawing I like to do much more details in the pre-sketch than I do when marker sketching. Since when I'm marker sketching I do a lot of exploration with my pens as well, and then I like for those construction lines to come through the sketch a little bit. In this case I'm trying to stay away from that. So since I want my lines to be more illustrative, I want to have the shape, volumes and details of my drawing 70 to 80% worked out. This means when I'm doing the lines, I can concentrate on the quality of the lines alone and don't have to think too much about the design of what I'm drawing because that is already on the paper. Returning a bit to the fine liners I'm working with, I like to have at least 3 different thicknesses. I have a basic line pen that is usually a 0.1 or a 0.2. While my earlier drawings I started with a 0.1, nowadays I tend to go straight to the 0.2 and avoid the 0.1 because it is a bit too thick for the thin details and it's a bit too thin for most of the lines, so I end up to have to go over them 2 or 3 times to get to the right thickness. So my standard fine liner is the 0.2. Then I have a 0.05 which I use for all the fine detail work, in this case everything on the Hyperspace Accelerator part of the ship that is not an outline is drawn with a 005 pen. And finally, I sometimes use a 0.5 thickness pen if I really want some lines to pop or if I want to make my drawing a bit more cartoony. Although in this case I avoided the 0.5, both because the size of the ship is quite small due to the size of the sketchbook, but also I was trying to not make it too cartoony. I also have a Pentel brush pen in handy if I have bigger surfaces to fill in with black. In this case, the star field I put behind my spacecraft as a graphic element was done with this Pentel pen. Okay, returning to the actual painting, here comes the part why I think a blocking in type of ink wash like this is perfect for beginners. As long as you have mixed enough gray ink with you, for you to work with, you just have to diligently fill in the areas you want to have in gray. Because it is water, it will behave very much like watercolor. If you keep the surface slightly wet, you will have a nice equal dispersion of the color. One of the things you have to pay attention to is having enough ink pre-mixed, because it is harder to get the same mix, and also if you have to take a break in the middle of your painting to mix some more ink in, the ink you have on the paper will dry and the next layer you bring in can and probably will create a new pattern. So a takeaway here is make sure you have enough gray mixed or pre-mixed. Going back in and adding new layers of ink is not a problem in itself, especially if you are doing this on purpose. I do that here as well to make certain areas darker and also to create some details and emphasize element separation. Other than this, there is not much else one can mess up when using ink wash in this particular style. As you will see towards the end of the video, I will also go in with a little bit of blue, yellow and also some red watercolors to accentuate some of the elements of the drawing. And that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something new from it. Here I would say the typical old subscribe, like, yada yada yada. You guys already know that. If you are a new person, yeah, then maybe hit that subscription button if you would like to see more content like this. I would like to mention my Discord channel where a couple of my viewers joined me and we give feedback to each other from time to time and just share our drawings. So if you feel like joining the community, the link is in my description. But yeah, that's all I had to say. As always, the most important part is that you guys have a great time and stay safe, and see you next time. Bye bye.